Listen to me carefully. The VIX is predicting we're going to have a down day tomorrow. These signals have not been correct the last few days, okay? Because when you go parabolic up and you come back and you can start going parabolic back down, again, you throw it out the window. Data doesn't work as well. Now, going into the sell-off, it was making incredible calls, being right over and over again. Again, when we had the top, the VIX, again, we broke out of this level. We had the tightening of the Bollinger Bands, and it predicted it. We got back above the 50-period moving average, and when that happens, bad things start happening on the S&P. Well, the VIX made some amazing calls. The last two were incorrect. Now you have two more. The one from yesterday and the one from today are predicting a down day on the S&P 500 tomorrow. Again, let me be clear. I'm not trying to trade daily short-term price fluctuations on the VIX, okay? That's not what I'm doing. I'm just using this to try to, hey, help me, guide me, and say, hey, could we be getting a bottom or a top or something? But I'm just telling you, based on historical data, that's the way it moves. Some guy think I'm trying to be, Nostradamus or something here. Ooh, predict the future. I'm just telling you, I'm looking at probability, okay? I don't know the future. I'm looking at odds and probability. I'm telling you that historically, when you start going parabolic, then it starts becoming broken, what we've had. I can tell you if the signal turns out to be correct, we have a down day tomorrow with the possible reversal candlesticks. If we start seeing volatility turn up, maybe with tensions in the Middle East or recession concerns or whatever the case may be, the VIX often tops before the S&P bottoms. So I still think we're going to take out the 200. Could I be wrong on that? Yeah, it doesn't have to play out that way. About probability. More often than not, the VIX will top before the S&P bottoms. Here they did it simultaneously. Sometimes it plays out that way. Why I still believe that we're probably going to test the 200 period and tag it and move to a new low. I could be completely wrong about that, but I'm looking for a bottom. The guts to tell you what I think. Well, the future, I'm just telling you about probability. Telling you, we've got two candles. Today we were down 10.65%, and yesterday 12.5%. These candles are predicting that we're going to have a down day on the S&P. The previous two bars, they were wrong. 5% chance it could happen, 15% chance we'll be wrong based on probability. Again, my signals came back up at the top. My sell signals came back up at the top, okay? I'm not trying to day trade VIX signals of probability. I'm just looking for, hey, could this rally be bottoming out here? Or could the rally be coming to a conclusion here? Could this be sell-off be coming to an end? We rose by 150%. These kinds of things. VIX gives us those bits of information. If you think I'm trying to call daily fluctuations, that's not what this tool is for. Looking for, hey, could a bottom develop soon? Could a top develop soon? The 50 period, we're going to have volatility on the S&P period. These kinds of things, okay? Indicator's perfect. To predict everyday price fluctuations and to trade that based on the VIX, that's not what this is for. I'm trying to predict daily moves on it's going to be up, 55 points today, and it'll peak at, 11:30 in the morning, and then it'll start. That's not what this is for. That's hocus pocus nonsense. It's about probability as traders and investors. Okay, so be clear about what this tool is for. And it's saying, hey, as we're coming up and hitting the 50, you got a shot at a turn off of that area. That's all it's saying. The gaps, hitting the moving averages, and hitting some resistance levels. I just want to show you VWAP resistance, VWAP support. The peak right here, when I call the top right here, see that little red line? That's where we've come up to right now. Okay, and that is where, again, we're in backtest mode. May overthrow it a little bit more like Bitcoin. I'll talk about that. Under it with the log scaling directly above is a 50 period and other VWAP resistance levels for NASDAQ. We bounced off the VWAP support going back to the October 2023 low. You look at this peak right here, and VWAP is volume weighted average price. You're just taking volume weighted average price from each of these points. That's all it is. And again, from the peak over here that we had in July of 2023, that's at this key support level. If we do move beyond the 200 period, this is the 17,000 area where I think we're going to find a bottom, horizontal support. And like I said, we move beyond that 17,000 area, you have this high 16,000 area at this low right here, and going back to the 2021 high, which I've talked about on the weekly chart. So again, we are at the VWAP resistance levels. There's a confluence of resistance here. We'll see if we turn down off of these levels. If we do, this is the area of support. This is S&P 500 with the VWAP resistance. And again, look at the VWAP resistance. We're coming right up into it here. VWAP support down over here at the October 2023 low takes us down here towards the 200, towards the 5,000 area, the low 5,000 area, which would take out that low. You have major horizontal support there. Again, this is why I think between 16,000, the high 16,000 area, 16,700 to 17,300, I think you'll find a bottom. We hit 17,400. If we get a higher low, and I'm wrong about the lower low, then maybe we don't reach this level. We'll see what happens. But I think you're going to likely come back down to this level. We're hitting these resistance levels, and directly overhead, you got this little box right here where, again, you have a major resistance from, again, I told you we were going back to fill that gap, and NASDAQ was going to get still at gap resistance. We filled it right on the nose, and then we tanked. And I told you that was going to happen. Nailed it. Counter trend. If you look at it, again, we're just getting above on NASDAQ here, just above this red line right here, just above it. We hit it yesterday, and we're just above it. And then the yellow line from the peak over here and some of these other turning points. There's just a confluence of resistance along with the rectangle box there. So if we get rejection here, I'll be watching. Do we go back, and do we test this low? Do we get a higher low or lower low? I think you're going to get a lower low. I could be wrong about that, and I have the guts to tell you exactly what I think. Just like when I told you back up at the top when we were diverging with NASDAQ on the 16th, I told you I thought that was the top. The very next day it was confirmed. All my signals turned bearish the very next day on the 17th of July, and again, we went down. Now we've had a rally back up. Again, we predicted that we'd go back up. Some moving averages towards the gap fills. Talked about all of this stuff. Had this rally back up to fill the second, the previous gap there. Now it's time to be watching. And just quickly, awesome oscillator, and a lot of my oscillators are still in the negative region, most of them. And I think we come back, test the lows, get a divergence, or move to a new low and get the divergence afterwards, one or the other. But this is NASDAQ daily chart. Got a bullish shift with momentum. We'll see if we turn off of resistance levels that I'm talking about in this video. We'll see if we remain in the negative region. That is problematic for this rally. NASDAQ daily chart here. Same thing with the S&P. We're slamming up into the 50 period. Again, we got candles of indecision. P got like a hanging man kind of looking candlestick. If you look at it up close, kind of hard to see here. NASDAQ got a candle of indecision. Again, awesome oscillator still negative territory. We're likely going to see a divergence develop or confirmation of a higher low with the MACD and the awesome oscillator. We'll be watching. Still go a little higher. Again, I'll be talking about the back test of the trend lines in this video. To continue to point out, momentum remains negative with the awesome oscillator, rallying into the declining moving averages, filling the gaps. After this big drop, we're coming back up and filling those gaps. So we're watching these levels closely. And if we have tensions in the Middle East today, before the day ends or going into days, again, that's something that could rattle markets. Whatever the catalyst may be, recession concerns, whatever it may be, again, I expect a test of the August lows. I was able to call the NASDAQ top because I was watching the semiconductors and the diversions here with the MACD and the RSI up here. And again, hitting the upper Bollinger Band, just like NASDAQ was. It peaked the day after. It peaked the day after NASDAQ. Hold on top for both of them. And again, be watching the semiconductor ETF because right now we're getting a hanging man with the black candlestick. So again, my candlesticks are meaningless unless they get confirmed, but you could still end up forming a divergence or a confirmation of a higher low. Had a target of 198. We came down to just above that level with this move down here, but we had this collapse, and that is one of the tools that I use to call the top with the NASDAQ is this divergence right here. But I wanted to make you aware that the semiconductor ETF SMH is getting a hanging man going into the 20 period, came back up and filled the gap. So again, we'll be watching if the semiconductors start tanking, if NVIDIA starts tanking, so will NASDAQ. It's back testing the broken trend line. So is the semiconductors. I don't have time to show you the chart, but it's also back testing a trend line. Same thing. This is one of the tools that I used to call the top with. I was able to call the day of the top as we were getting these signals. NASDAQ was slamming into two major trend lines on the weekly time frame, and that's why I told you it topped the 10th, predicting that would happen with the sell-off with the CPI on the 11th, and I got that right. I'm looking for a bottom to eventually develop with both the semiconductors and with the NASDAQ. I'm going to show you why I don't think that we have bottomed yet. And again, we may be in a bottoming process where we get a higher low. I could be wrong about a lower low, okay? Over here, on S&P 60-minute chart, here at the April low, we bottomed out, we came back, we got a higher low. Back at the October low, we got a lower low. At the top, we got a higher high. NASDAQ got a lower high. Again, I'm looking for a bottom. That's the point. And S&P 60-minute chart. Now, all the top on S&P on the 16th when it diverged with NASDAQ. We started dropping below the 50, bounced off the 200, and then got rejection at the 50. 50 crossed the 200. It's been below ever since. We've now seen this dramatic drop when I told you over here, we're going to go up and fill this gap, and then the crash was going to resume. At that time, that if we went down to the trend line on NASDAQ and it tried to bottom, S&P to bottom, if NASDAQ tried to bottom at that trend line, you break the trend line, and get a much bigger drop. And again, it's all about support and resistance. It's not about Nostradamus, I can see the future. It's about support and resistance of mathematically based indicators, okay? It's not some hocus pocus nonsense, okay? To call short-term price fluctuations, like I've talked about the VIX, it predicts moves, and the VIX is predicting a down day tomorrow. Short-term price fluctuations. Again, my sell signals came back up at the top, okay? Bottom's going to develop here. Whether higher, lower, lower, low, I don't know. I don't have a criteria yet for a bottom, and this is why I think there's either more work to be done, either test of this low for a higher low or a lower low, one or the other, into the 200 period moving average. And this is why, look, the 50s crossed below the 200. We're below, price is still below the 50. Even if we overthrow it like we did over here, the 50 is still below it. You got to get above the 200, the black line, okay? You got to get above the 200, the 50's got to get above the 200, and then you got to bring oscillator here into positive territory. Over here, you had the bullish criteria met. We got above the 200 period with the S&P. The 50 got above it here, and it was validated with the oscillator going into the positive region. Okay, so here we dropped below the 200. Okay, 50 dropped below the 200 right there, and it was validated with the oscillator moving into the negative region. This is why I don't think we've bottomed yet. I either think we're going to come back and confirm a higher low, and you're going to roll over here and get a confirmation of a higher low, or you're going to form a divergence, one or the other. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for a bottoming process, and I think that if we get a dramatic drop, maybe that's with tensions in the Middle East, maybe it's with something else, maybe it's recession fears, whatever the case may be, or a combination of things. I'm looking for a bottom in that lower 5,000 to 5,100 area. If we get the higher low, the 5,100 area, the 5,000 to high 4,900 area, if we get the lower low, we could see a pretty dramatic drop. Again, the people that never saw this coming are telling us it's over. I told you we were going to rally up into these levels. Whether we get a weaker rebound or a stronger rebound, again, I've talked about these gaps and these moving averages, but I'm just telling you, look, I don't think it's over. This is why. Because, again, we've had this big rally back up to fill the second gap up there, and yet we're still in the negative region. Okay, so I think that we're going to turn off this level. Maybe we go a little higher, maybe we don't. We're coming into this trend line now. If you exclude the shadow, we're coming right into it. We're forming a bear flag pattern or a rising wedge in the bear flag pattern, and we're forming this reversal pattern that I think will either give us a higher low or the lower low. So I don't think we bottomed yet. I could be wrong. If we don't move to a new low, we can get the higher low, but I am looking for a bottom. We don't have the criteria for the bullish scenario yet. Moving averages are in a bearish arrangement in the oscillator as well. Now the same is true for the NASDAQ. This is a 60-minute chart of the NASDAQ. Again, we've had, back over here when I called the top, we had that divergence form on indicators, okay? We dropped down below the 200. Then we saw the 50 cross below the 200. It's still below the 200. The 50 is turning up, but it's still below the 200. We're still below the 200 with NASDAQ's price. We may rally towards the trend line and get a bigger overthrow of the back test of the trend line. Again, with log scaling, we haven't reached it yet. We're still under it a little bit. With the linear scaling, we're overthrowing it just a little bit. We may still try to hit the 200 here, the 400 period moving average. That's the red line right there. But look at the oscillator still in the negative region. And again, when we got the drop below the 200, 50 drop below it, validation confirmed with the oscillator moving into the negative region. So I think you're either going to get confirmation of a higher low. We'll either maybe go a little higher and then turn off the trend line in the 200 and a bigger back test. And if you get a higher low, you've got a shot at an inverse head and shoulders pattern. Certainly possible if we get that higher low scenario. But I still think you're going to do what Bitcoin did and go hit the 200. I could be completely wrong about that. Again, my indicators don't say where prices are going. They just say, hey, the turn's likely going to happen here. Okay. The bounce that we got here, I told you we were going to get a bounce. We're going to turn right there off of the resistance and off of the horizontal neckline there of the head and shoulders pattern. So again, my signals don't say, hey, where it's going, but we can measure head and shoulder patterns. We've already reached the objective target, by the way. But again, the rising wedge and the bearish flag on S&P with the rising wedge within it, I think is going to take us back down to test these lows. Whether a higher low or lower low, I can't tell you the future. I could just tell you what I think. I think we're going to get a lower low. Maybe S&P gets a higher low and NASDAQ makes a lower low. Sometimes they diverge like they did back at the top. Larger diversions will occur. S&P, look at the S&P. I told you it's forming a possible bear flag, a rising wedge inside the bear flag. And I told you, again, we can go a little higher. We hit it today. We have this boundary being hit now. You're rallying into this trend line, excluding the shadow right here. If we go a little higher, like NASDAQ, you can go a little bit higher into our 200 period moving average. Still have a really nice looking rising wedge or bear flag, rising wedge in that larger bear flag pattern. Told you, again, to be watching these gaps down over here. We had the Hollywood candlestick at the bottoming tail. I believe this rally is going to fill and either get a higher low or a lower low. But again, I think a bottom's going to form. S&P is rallying up to the 50 period. I talked about that possibility. We overshot the 20 period. We're coming up here and hitting the 50. You've got a possible little hanging man candlestick here. NASDAQ's got more of a doji. We're rallying up into the trend line right here. If we exclude the shadows on the 60-minute chart, you're coming right up into it. If we include it, maybe go a little bit higher. But we're filling these gaps that we've been talking about. This one here, and again, we'll be watching to see if we come back down. Again, told you, I think that the S&P is going to tag the 200. I don't know that we go below it. I think NASDAQ will, but I'm looking for a bottom. I think we're going to come down here, tag the 200, probably move below this low, and then bottom out and go make a new high. The S&P, I think, or NASDAQ will move to a new low. Now, if I'm wrong about that, I'm looking for a bottoming process still. We could see it move back here and get a higher low and still get the bottoming process and not reach the 200. That is still possible as well. Again, but I have the guts to tell you what I think. We're going to tag that 200, probably take out this low, but we'll see. But regardless of which way it plays out, I'm looking for a bottom. Okay, I'm looking for a bottom. Like I was looking for a top up here and a divergence with NASDAQ, which again, called that top because of the divergence with NASDAQ there on the nose, and my signals turned bearish the very next day. We still have the bearish arrangement of the moving averages at 10, 20, below the 50. They're pointing down. So you're rallying into these declining moving averages. I think you're going to come back over here, and then I think you're going to bottom somewhere here with the higher low or lower low. What happens towards that 200 period moving average. I think we're going to rally up to new highs and come back and fill the gap up here, and that's why, because where the gap was at the top, I think NASDAQ will make a lower high. I think S&P will make a higher high. So there's going to be a test of these lows, whether higher low or lower low. We'll see what happens. My guess is a lower low. I could be completely wrong about a lower low. Looking at these support, VWAP support, the 200 period, looking at these levels, we have a gap fill down here. Just looking at some of these levels, but we still may get the higher low scenario. Regardless, I'm looking for a bottom. Again, S&P with the bear flag and the rising wedge. Still a little wiggle room here, again, for perfectly parallel. It may not be perfect, but again, just perfectly parallel. You may try to move into that 200 period moving average directly overhead here on the 60-minute chart. Again, I told you that we were at extremes here. We did roll over. We went sideways. We rolled over. We went, we had a move up, move down, move up, move down, and we got the candles of indecision on the daily chart. Of that, so again, we'll be watching these 200 periods. Maybe we tag them, maybe we don't, but I'm looking for a turn here. S&P can still reach the trend line for a back test. NASDAQ's still under it with log scaling and can overthrow it with the linear scaling. Bit of diversions here, but we are up at extremes, so I am going to be looking for a downturn either immediately or hang out at here a little bit longer and then turn down. 2-minute chart here of S&P. Now filling the gap at 44.47. We were just under it. Yesterday we were just under that level. We're filling that gap now on a closing basis. Possible little hanging man on the daily time frame here, but if we go a little higher and hit the 200, then again maybe candlestick develops. Maybe we go higher and get a topping tail and you get back-to-back reversal bars. We'll see what happens. If we see something rattle the market, then we'll see if we sell off the 50 period here in the daily time frame. Just quickly with our linear scaling here, again, with linear on NASDAQ, we're overthrowing it. Log, we're not reaching the trend line quite yet for NASDAQ. S&P's got the linear up here, and again, this is from this low to this low right here, and we kind of overthrew it a little bit with these levels right here. If we include it, if we include those lows right there, we're just coming right up into that trend line right there right now. So again, going to be looking for the RSI to roll over and get a divergence or confirmation of a higher low, but this is my target area here, and then I think we're going to bottom, and then I think you're going to get this big move back up. We'll see what happens here, but I think there's a test of the August low coming. We'll see if we get a higher low or a lower low. Gap fill down here at 5,064. You've got the 200 below that. You've got horizontal support down here. We'll see if we test this low and get a higher low or lower low. But I do think a test is coming. My guess is it's going to be a lower low. I could be completely wrong about that. But I think this rally will fail and you will go back and test the low. Quickly, NASDAQ is forming a rising wedge going into the trend line. If you exclude the shadow up here, connecting these two peaks up here, and before I connected this point here and this point here, the lower high. But if you connect the peaks up here, we're hitting the trend line, excluding the shadow. If you include it, it's a little higher, closer to our 200 period moving average. Again, we're back testing the broken trend line. So I'll be watching to see if we try to go a little higher or if we turn, but I'm going to be looking for these rising wedges to break down. Tensions break out there in the Middle East. That could rattle the markets real fast. We can see these things begin to reverse and gap lower, or whatever the catalyst may be, recession concerns, whatever. But I'm watching these rising wedges, and I'm going to be looking again to see if we get a higher low or lower low. You got a possible channel here. If we turn right here off these levels, we'll be watching rally with a gap and go with the PPI, and then we tried to rally, it failed, and then we kind of went sideways, and we possible topping candlesticks near some resistance levels in the daily time frame. Like with NASDAQ, a doji looking candlestick here, again, it could mark a reversal if we, again, nice parallel channel. We'll be watching to see if we begin to turn and close back below the 20 period, the blue line there. And if we start turning down, if tensions heat up in the Middle East overnight, you see Iran move and Hezbollah move to attack Israel, can rattle markets real fast. So we'll see what happens. Expecting it to happen by Thursday, but then negotiations happened with ceasefire, so that's kind of delayed this, but we'll see if it still happens or not. Who knows? Just telling you because it's something that can rattle markets. We just simply don't know. Sometimes geopolitical things do, sometimes they don't. This probably will. It happens, or is it going to be delayed more? But I'm just telling you the latest news on it to be aware of and pay attention to. Candle indecision. We got a very similar candlestick again with the semiconductors. Now, again, I do believe that the NASDAQ is going to test the August low. And again, I have the guts to tell you what I think. I believe that we're going to make a new low. Could I be wrong? I believe you're going to get a close below the 200. You're going to close down here in the 17,000 to high 16,000 area. And I think you're going to get a big drop. I believe regardless, we could still get a higher low. I could be wrong about the lower low. I believe this is a counter trend. Watch the video all the way through. You'll see why it's a counter trend. I believe we're coming down here. Bottoming process. Over here we got a higher low. Back in October we got a lower low. It could happen either way. Here we got a higher high with the divergence up here. I believe you're going to form a divergence on the RSI that could give us the lower low I'm looking for. It could be a higher low. Doesn't matter. I'm looking for a bottom here. Like I told you up here, again, by 10th. We topped out. I told you that to be looking for a close below the upper Bollinger Band, not seen on this chart. All kinds of sell signals leading up into that. We are slamming into major trend lines of resistance. And I told you that, again, we'd likely get a CPI sell-off. CPI today, but matter of fact. But the very next day, I told you all the criteria was met that I was looking for. And I told you that I believe that the top is in, and I called for, gosh, we dropped 500 points. We were going to rally back up to the 78.6 Fibonacci and get a lower high, probably diverge with the S&P, and it would make a higher high. It did. The S&P peaked a few days later on the 16th. We peaked on the 10th here. Called a top when they diverged for the S&P, and this happened. My sell signals, which are correct, they came back up here, okay? I'm looking for buy signals down in here. I could be wrong, and we could get a higher low, and this could be established and validated as a bottom. My guess is that we're going to take out that low. Could I be wrong on that? Yeah. But I have the guts to tell you exactly what I think. So whichever way it plays out, I believe we're going to come down here and we're going to establish a bottom. And then I think you're going to, whether a lower low or a higher low, regardless, I think you're going to surge back up here to fill the gap and form a topping process. I believe that the top is already in. When I called the top over here, I told you that I believe that that is the top for NASDAQ. Okay, and we've already started the bear market, but we're in the topping process. S&P is probably going to move to a new high. Lose sight of the big picture. Between here are short-term price fluctuations. Okay, the signals were given back over here. Okay, and I told you down over here, actually at each one of these rallies, right here, below the 20 period, we were going to remain below it, get a lower high. We did. We had the sharp drop, and we had this rally back up, and I told you we were going to still at gap resistance. Why? Because you had your head and shoulders pattern right here. The head, the left shoulder, the head formation, and the right shoulder right there. And this was a back test of that. And I told you that that was gap resistance in this neckline, and we were going to stall right there. And we the next day we gapped, we opened, we moved higher, and we sold off all stinking day. And I was correct. Down here, I told you got a shot at a bottom, but my signals would have to turn back to bullish. My signals turned bearish up here. And I told you we hit a major trend line on the weekly chart. We're back testing that trend line right now. I'll show it to you. Told you again, we very well could try to bottom there. But if we broke the 100 period here, and if we just had a decisive break of the trend line, look out below, we're going to drop. And if I told you if we drop down up here, I told you we were going back to the 17,000, high 16,000 area. I told you if we bounce right there, you got a shot at a rebound to fill the gap immediately. If you don't, you're coming down here, and then you'll do it. And I've talked about both of those scenarios. But my signals, which are correct, came back up here, okay, with this divergence and all the sell signals that I talked about back up there. Slamming into the trend lines of resistance, which, again, we were told by the experts this wasn't going to happen. But it did. And, you know, we've now seen this drop from the high to the low, under 16% for NASDAQ, just under 10% for the S&P 500. I don't think it's over. Now, again, I have the guts to tell you what I think. I think we're going to move to a new low. We're going to do what Bitcoin did and get closes below the 200 period moving average at its July low. And again, the market's following Bitcoin. Could I be wrong about that? Yeah, we can get a higher low, but I think that there's going to be a test of this level. A lower low or higher low, doesn't matter. Eventually, we're going to bottom out. As we go into Jackson Hole, we'll have Powell, not this Friday, but the week after that. And again, if we get a pretty ugly drop or a higher low, I think that we'll establish a bottom, maybe surrounding Jackson Hole or shortly after that. Okay? Doesn't have to be the exact day of Powell or, whatever. We're going to rally into September 18th into where I believe that the Fed is going to cut rates, do the pivot. The herd believes that's bullish. The herd believes that we're going to take off. And when we start bottoming out, okay, we're probably going to get, they're telling us that we're not going to get another dump, okay? I believe that we will. My signals are still bearish. We still have a series of lower highs, lower lows, and we have a bearish arrangement of the moving averages. So again, either a higher low or lower low, we'll see which way it plays out. It could play out either way. But again, I tell you exactly what I think. Most people do not do that. When we had the top up here, I told you the market was topping. I told you the very next day, I think the top is in. I predicted it was going to happen before it happened. The trend lines that I talked to you about on the weekly chart and other things. Indicators were flashing sell signals. I didn't have that down here. I didn't have the buy signals. I have momentum buy signals, but I didn't have that. So I still think we test this low. Maybe we get a higher low. But again, guts. Most people call moves after they've already been made. Everybody starts saying we're going to crash after we started breaking that trend line, and then we rally back up, and now they're saying, oh, the bottom's in, and getting uber bullish on social media. Again, these people are very emotional. They call things after they happen. I tell you before it happens. I tell you when it happens. And again, I told you down here, we were going to get a rally back up. Watch the gaps, watch the moving averages. What did we do? We came back up to the gaps. We can get above the 10, we can go to the 20 and go to this other gap. If we get above this gap fill, we've talked about these levels at great length and detail. NASDAQ, this is the linear scaling. We're overthrowing the trend line just a little bit with the linear scaling again. And again, if we connect the highs over here, you can go a little bit higher, closer to the 50 period. If we, again, I drew a trend line from the lower high that's set up there to this peak. We're overthrowing that trend line a little bit. But again, we're throwing, Bitcoin did that. Bitcoin broke the trend line and it overthrew it, but then now it's turning back down off of it. And again, NASDAQ's following Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin or NASDAQ's going to close below the 200 period, but then I think it's going to bottom in this area. Again, you got a possible head and shoulders. My guess is you don't get the head and shoulders. My guess is you're going to come down here, get the higher low or the lower low, and come back and form a double top, just like Bitcoin did. And then it collapsed right after the double top, and it dropped 29% in 8 days. And I called the bottom on Bitcoin, called the top on Bitcoin, said we were going to 70,000, right on the nose. I'm telling you, if we bottom out here, when I call bottom, I'm going to be telling you, hey, we're going back up to fill the gaps, and we're going to be going up to the 20,400 area, overthrow that area. I think we get a lower high. Could I be wrong if we go to a higher high, slam into the trend line? Yeah, I have the guts to tell you exactly what I think. Very few people have the guts to do that. I think a divergence is going to form here. And again, I think we're going to carve out a bottom. We've got the bullish MACD cross here. I think the MACD will likely form a divergence, but we could try to go towards that trend line. We still may try to overthrow the trend line here a little bit like Bitcoin did and move closer to this trend line right here. Of a rising wedge forming on the 60-minute chart. So again, I'll be watching. Do we get a higher low or do we get that close I'm looking for below the 200? But I could be wrong about that. Regardless, I'm looking for a bottoming process and then a massive rally back up. So again, this rally right here, I believe, is a pump and dump. Okay, just like the rally over here back up to gap resistance in the neckline. I told you right here was a rally that was going to be sold at gap resistance. Got it, nailed that. Like I told you, we were getting the rally into with the Wednesday holiday on light volume. I told you that rally was going to be sold with the diversions, and that was correct. Into those trend lines of resistance into the weekly time frame. Here we're hitting these trend lines, and we overthrew those trend lines a little bit. Again, we can overthrow it here. Bitcoin overthrew it, but it's still going to be that we test these levels. The question is, do we get a higher low or do we get a lower low? That's what we're going to be watching. And then I think a bottom forms, massive rally. I think the shorts will cover. A lot of this is short covering and a short squeeze. I think it's a pump and dump, and then, it's being proclaimed it's over, and then we dump down, and then shorts are ganging up here at this area again, and I think that begin to see all the shorts cover, and dip crowd comes in, whether higher low or lower low, and then I think you get your big rally as more short covering people that don't realize what's going on once we do get a bottom. We're going to have people going, no, we're going to keep crashing, and we're not going to crash. We're going to form a bottom. Okay, we're in a top. We're not in the crash phase yet. We're in the topping process. I keep saying that. Topping process. And before the big bear market crash comes, you get a topping process. I do think that NASDAQ has peaked, though. This is our linear scaling. Log scaling, we're just coming right up to that area. And by the way, NASDAQ was up about 0.1%, just under 0.1%, up about 16 points. And we got a candle of indecision kind of here today. But again, look at these trend lines on the log scaling. Been showing you these trend lines. This one right here, we actually, from these lows, we actually breached it just a little bit here. And again, I've got the red trend line where we breached it. If we include the lows here, then I have the black trend line connecting these lows over here to the October 2023 low. And we're back testing these levels. And again, we could go a little higher, maybe closer to the 50. And again, remember, Bitcoin overthrew its trend line, but it's now turning down off of it. So again, I think Bitcoin is the leader. The market is following. They have a positive correlation. They had a negative correlation. That's why I called the NASDAQ top over here, and I called the Bitcoin bottom in July at that time, early July, because they had a negative correlation. So Bitcoin helped me predict the top here along with the other indicators. But again, you can clearly see that we're just under the trend line here with the log scaling. So, give or take, overthrow it a little bit with that linear or come up here. Regardless, I think we're going to end up seeing a close back below the 20, back below the 10. Whatever the catalyst may be, whether that's tensions in the Middle East, which is being delayed, some negotiations that are taking place, the ceasefire may be on, who knows? Political issues sometimes impact the market. We don't know, but oftentimes, markets bottom on bad news. So if there is something that happens this week, I'd be looking for a bottoming process going into Jackson Hole and the Fed next week. I think if we get a big dramatic drop, I think you can see a bottom. Whether that's a higher low or lower low remains to be seen, but I have the guts to tell you I think it's going to be a lower low. Could I be wrong? Yeah. I tell you exactly what I think. Looking for a bottom, okay? Just like I was looking for a top up here, it happened. Major resistance here is major support. Looking for a bottom. Then we'll be looking for a big rebound. Watching these trend lines, and again, the people that never saw the crash coming, they're now telling us it's over, and we're likely just back testing these levels into the bearish arrangement of the moving averages into declining moving averages and filling our gaps, and then we're going to get another dump. And whether that's a higher low or low low, we'll see what happens. Looking for, in all likelihood, divergences or confirmation of higher lows on the MACD and the RSI here. So we'll be watching for that. Log and linear scaling. Let me just show you Bitcoin. It overthrew. Here on the log scaling, we're not there yet. Okay, if the red trend line, we haven't reached it. On the log scaling, we are overthrowing it right now just a little bit.